Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. So today I was going to do a video based on my post-launch thoughts and how I was sort of feeling about the game now that I've played it for, I think I'm about 17 hours in or something like that. I haven't had a whole lot of time to play, but hey, it's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. I might do a bit more of a deep dive on my thoughts and feelings, maybe at a later date, maybe next week. Or over the weekend or something. But for today, what I wanted to do is take a look at the build format style of video that I would like to present to you guys, hopefully in the future. And I really wanted to tackle spellswords today because I know that they're a pretty common type of character that people sort of multi-class into to try to achieve. You know, a little bit of martial prowess, a little bit of casting prowess, and to try to combine those two archetypes together. So I use the word spellsword pretty liberally here, and really I'm referring to any character that is aiming to be a mix of melee and spell-focused combat. So how do these builds work, and what is the how and the why of it? Well, there are two primary considerations that come into play. Firstly would be effectively utilizing your attribute score, and secondly would be maintaining your spell slot progression while multi-classing. Now these factors come into play when making almost any character, but a spellsword type character is more than most, as you're spreading yourself really thin when trying to play a character of this type. That said, this is probably the most common type of multi-class to undergo, as it allows your character to gain a little piece of the discipline in which it's lacking. So, attributes. Let's start here as it's the longest portion of the video and encompasses a few other topics which we'll need to touch on. In order to play an effective martial class like a fighter, we need to invest in our strength attribute to increase the melee damage that we deal. The same goes for casters, obviously, and so meshing these characters together can become a bit tricky. We often fall into the trap when multi-classing of spreading our attributes thin in order to try and shove two classes together that maybe don't at first glance mesh very nicely. So my recommendation to overcome this issue is to first take a look at the two classes that you're trying to merge and work out what their primary attributes are. Are they single stat dependent like a bard or a fighter, or are they using multiple stats like, say, a paladin or maybe a monk? This will help you to work out, one, what classes will mesh together easily, and two, which classes will require a little bit more finessing. So, for example, a paladin uses strength and charisma as its primary attributes, followed by constitution and then arguably dexterity. This means it's already, as a single class, very multiple ability score dependent. If I was to throw, say, a druid into the mix here as a multi-class option, I suddenly also need to add like wisdom to that list of primary stats. This is not really an effective way to play a character in general, and so we need to find ways to work around this. This build combination is not impossible though, believe it or not, and this is why I mentioned finessing. So, druid comes with a cantrip called Shillelagh, which allows you to imbue a quarterstaff or a club type weapon, and for the duration of that you are able to use your wisdom attribute to make melee damage rolls instead of strength. This, in theory, allows you to completely dump strength as a paladin, which seems completely insane, if you wanted to, and you can just run with primary stats of wisdom and charisma. Now, I don't want this to get misconstrued. I'm not by any means recommending you do this. In fact, I would strongly advise against doing this. However, it is there to demonstrate what is possible if you choose to focus your stats towards a specific build, either on character creation or when you respec, like once you reach a certain level. So another thing I did mention in my multi-classing mistakes video, which is linked up above, is that it's also possible to have two spellcasting classes multi-class together and only focus on one of those for damage dealing purposes. So here's example number 2. If I was to create, say, a melee-focused cleric and a sorcerer multi-class, I would require wisdom and charisma, for their spellcasting, along with strength in this case, as it's basically the same situation as the paladin at this point. However, if I was to focus on my charisma for damage dealing spells and use mostly my cleric spells for buffing and healing my allies, I could sacrifice my wisdom stat, as those types of spells don't require an attack roll. They don't require a damage roll, saving throws, or even difficulty checks. There are a few other comments I'd just like to throw in here as well. Firstly, there is a feature in the game currently that I need to address, and that is the Warlock class. They have a fantastic feature on level 3 called Pact of the Blade. Now, this feature allows you to summon a basic weapon or to bind an existing weapon that you have to you. This bound weapon rolls its hit and damage die using your primary spellcasting modifier, which in a Warlock's case, that is Charisma. This is really fantastic, as it means that you can use whatever weapon that you currently have, and you also gain proficiency with that weapon. Obviously, there's a few exceptions when it comes to heavy weapons, but it allows you to use a lot of different weapon types and roll those weapon types with your Charisma stat. And Charisma as a stat is very popular among spellcasting classes, and so this is really a good way of accessing Charisma as your melee attribute for rolling damage and rolling to hit with your melee weapons. So next, in D&D, there are many cantrips that allow you to, they sort of assist you, in creating spellsword type builds. So Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade are great examples of this. They allow you to effectively get access to the extra attack feature of martial classes without investing quite as heavily into them. And you also benefit your spellcasting modifiers because they are cantrips that you're casting and they have magical damage components. So I only mention these, they're not in the game. However, they will definitely be modded into the game very soon, I'm sure. And if you would like to hunt for those mods and add them into your game, it might make creating a spell sword type build a little bit easier. I only mention it because they will definitely be modded in soon. If you're against mods for whatever reason, then just ignore it and don't worry about it. There's plenty of ways to play a spell sword without them. Secondly, there are many classes like fighters and rogues that focus on only one attribute. These classes make a pretty fantastic option to multi-class into as a spellcaster, as you have plenty of attribute points to spend, and focusing on 2 primary stats isn't too much of a stretch. There are some great ways to play with your attributes to really get the most out of your spells. So now that we've got attributes out of the way, let's talk about spell slots, as that is the other major factor here. So for the uninitiated, basically classes in Baldur's Gate 3 gain spells of higher levels and the ability to cast them with spell slots at 3 different rates. So firstly, you have your non-casters, they're like your fighters and your rogues, your barbarians. They get no spell slot progression at all, and they get no spell slots. Secondly, you have your full casters, which are like your warlocks, your wizards, your bards, which gain full spell slot progression. And then finally, you have your half casters, and these are like your paladins and your rangers, which still gain spell slot progression, but at half the rate of the full casters. So why is this important? As a spell sword, you really want to remain as close to full casting progression as possible. This will grant you access to these more powerful or higher level spells. However, this does come with some caveats, which we'll sort of get into in a bit. So if you wanted to multi-class with a more martial focused class as a spellcaster, how would you maintain your spell slot progression? That's the question. Well, there are a few options here, but the main idea is that you focus on classes that still give you half spell slot progression at least. So you will lose out on a bit on your max level spell slots, however you will still continue to gain them at half the rate versus not gaining them at all, and you will gain martial prowess on top of that. Some key things to add here is that it's not just the ranger and the paladin that are options for you. The rogue also has the arcane trickster subclass, and the fighter has the eldritch knight subclass, which are both fantastic because they give you half spell slot progression. So I can actually strongly recommend Fighter, in fact, as the action surge ability that you get on level 2 as a fighter gives you access to a second action on your turn, which you can use to make a second attack or cast a second spell. And it's incredibly potent if you don't want to invest the full 5 levels into a martial class for the extra attack feature that you usually get. And just on the caveats that I mentioned earlier was that it may not always be the case that you want to continue to level your spellcasting past a certain point. If you're only in the casting class for a certain spell, maybe you stop there and not continue to progress that class and focus on your martial prowess. It's important to note that even if you continue in a half-caster class, you don't continue to gain higher level spells for your spellcasting class. You are only continuing to unlock high-level spell slots to cast spells with. The reason this is important is that you may, say, reach level 5 in a sorcerer, and you unlock level 3 spells. You get, say, lightning bolt, and then you multi-class, and you don't ever go back to sorcerer. If you continue to gain higher level spell slots, if you multi-class into a class with spell slot progression, you can still only cast lightning bolt, but you'll be able to cast it with a higher level spell slot, which will increase its damage. So that's important. Finally, I just wanted to touch on some feats. I think feats are really important for a lot of spellsword builds because it allows you to access features that you might miss out on that other classes get a little bit earlier. I'm just going to mention 3 of them, but I'll chuck a couple on the screen that you guys can check out. So the first one, and the obvious one, is the Warcaster feat. So this is really great. It gives you advantage on saving throws to maintain concentration, and you can also replace your usual attack of opportunity with a cast. Now, in D&D, it's not limited to a single spell, but on one of the wikis, I noticed that it said that you're only able to use Shocking Grasp. So if someone runs past you, you get to cast Shocking Grasp on them instead of making an opportunity attack. Now, that's quite strong. It's stronger if you can use the spells that you want to use and not Shocking Grasp, but it's still there as an option to use your spellcasting modifier rather than your melee attack modifier. Next, we have the Elemental Adept feat. So this basically allows you to choose spells of a chosen type or a chosen element, and any spell that you use within that element it ignores damage resistance that enemies have. And it makes it so that if you ever roll a 1, it doesn't count as a 1 and counts as a 2. So you can't critically miss, basically. And then finally, I just wanted to mention the Lucky feat as well. So Lucky is one of those a bit unassuming feats, but it's actually really great. It allows you to gain 3 luck points per long rest, which you can then use to gain advantage on either attack rolls, ability checks, or saving throws, or you can make the enemy re-roll their attack rolls against you. So this is quite a little handy feature. They operate as reactions, so you'll know whether the enemy is going to hit you before you choose to re-roll their attack, and same vice versa. If you need to get advantage or you need to do an ability check or whatnot, you'll be able to react to that with the Lucky feature. So could be really handy to get a clutch spell attack roll or a melee attack roll or whatever you need it for. Phew. That was a lot. So thank you very much for sticking with me through all of that. I hope that it was helpful to you in planning your next spellsword build. I also just wanted to recommend this spreadsheet. I'll show it on screen to anyone who is interested. It's for D&D and not for Baldur's Gate, but I found it to be a really fantastic calculator to use. I found it on Reddit by this awesome creator. I'll put them on here as well, and I'll link the spreadsheet down below so you guys can grab it too. This spreadsheet really just allows me to work out what I'll get on each level and plan builds a little bit more effectively. But yeah, thanks again, and I look forward to creating a proper build video once I get through the campaign and actually reach the maximum level. But thanks again for everyone. If you need a bit more information, check out my multi-classing mistakes video. But for now, thank you very much, and I'll catch you all later.